everyone who's here, I think we know why we're here, women in sales, whoop, whoop. But I wanted to pass the mic over to the ladies who are joining us today to kind of have this discussion. My name's Alicia Murphy. I'll be the moderator. I'm a sales manager at Leadfeeder, and I live just outside of Chicago. And I'll pass it over to the other Leadfeeder in here, Carol, and then we can just kind of go pass it to whomever.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Carol Martindale. I'm the VP of Revenue Operations here at Leadfeeder. I am based out of the Lake George region of New York, but formerly was a New York City resident, so know all about it. I'll pass it on to Alexine.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alexine Moudouar. I am joined today by Boo Moudouar, who's going to be lurking in the background here, a brand new kitten. But I am a strategic account executive at Alice, and I just took over as CEO for Women in Sales. So this panel is very much something that's interesting and up my alley. And I'm so excited to be joined here with this amazing group of women. Oh, I'm supposed to pass it. Ashley.
I'm Ashley Zacks. I am a senior account executive at Chili Piper. I am also the president of Proud Pipers, which is our LGBTQIA+ employee resource group here at Chili Piper. And I'll pass it to Maggie.
Awesome. I'm Maggie Bloom. I'm account executive at Mailshake. And a fun fact about me is I did used to live in Chicago, just like some other people on here who currently live there, but I moved to West Virginia with a remote first program called Ascend. So I've been loving it. It's a fun change, but I'm super excited to talk today.
Awesome. Is everybody remote in here? I don't know if I asked that. Everyone's working. Obviously, we all have like our homes behind us, but yeah. Okay. Awesome. Yep. That might be a cool thing to dive in on a little bit too, like the impact of that and what it's done for you, like hurdles and positives and things like that as well. So again, welcome everyone who's joining us live today, or even for the recording, or those who are joining us on LinkedIn. This is Women in Sales, Finding Your Own Path and Owning It, informal discussion with a group of women who have done just that. Today, what we're going to do is just really kind of run through some key topics that we feel really passionate about and share our stories and examples. The goal of this is to really empower the sales profession for women. So why don't we just kick it off? And I think this is a great question for everyone. So I'd love to learn a little bit more, and I think the folks that are joining us would love to learn a little bit more about what drove each of us to explore and pursue a career in sales or revenue. Why don't we have maybe Carol kick us off?
Oh boy. Okay.
You can do it. I believe in you.
Yeah. So how I got started in sales is really interesting. First, let me start off with when I was interning during my college years. I was interning for a marketing role, at Bloomberg Television. One of my colleagues there, he actually said, Cara, if you really want to be successful in your career, you should have at least one sales role. I 100% recommend it. I just let that pass over me. I'm like, no, I don't want to be a sleazy car salesman. I'm like, no. I'm going to go marketing, whatever. Fast forward to when I turned 30, that's when I finally jumped into sales. So I wish I listened sooner. But the reason I jumped into sales was because there was a position open for Leadfeeder that allowed me to be like the first salesperson, business development manager in the US. And it allowed me to foster my entrepreneurship. And I felt like, you know what, it's time I listened to that advice and let's just jump in 2 feet and see what happens. And best decision in my life. I've learned so much. It's helped me to sell myself internally, like navigating my career choices, even like in regular life, like being better at negotiation, like with cars and even my like internet package. And like, it's just, you get this whole new outlook in life. I wish I listened sooner, but it's never too late to start, right? And so here I am now. Hope that
Love it. Yeah, I mean, we're selling ourselves in everything we do, right? Yeah. Awesome. Who wants to go next?
I can go next. So yeah, I feel like everyone kind of falls into sales roles, and I'm excited to hear if anyone has a different story, but it's usually kind of like not at the beginning of what you were looking for. But I started out, I was an accountant, and kind of my mindset with everything is I like to challenge myself, which sounds really cliche, but I do it in the weirdest ways. So I thought to myself, I'm a pretty shy person. I'm really introverted. So let's explore what, like a different part of business. Let's explore sales. And so my core, like, the thing that I wanted to learn the most was to become more extroverted to get into sales. So I remember even saying in interviews when I was first interviewing to become a BDR. And even my friends would tell me, like, I had called a friend once I got a sales role and they're like, you're going to be in sales. And what I found from that was more of my introverted side of me has helped me way more in sales than trying to be extroverted, which has been just amazing. But yeah, it's kind of funny how I fell into it thinking like I'm going to become way more outgoing, which I kind of have in a bit, like in a sense, but yeah, leaning into active listening and me being introverted has actually helped me way more in my career than the opposite. But that's how I fell into it.
That's awesome. We're seeing more and more people from like non-traditional kind of paths. I bet, not to change this, I want to make sure everybody tells this story, but I bet Alex, have some awesome nuggets of knowledge since she's the founder and CEO of the Women in Sales group about people that are coming from totally different industries and applying the skills they have to be a really successful sales professional. But Alexine, how did you get started in sales?
Yes. So much like Maggie and everybody else, that I landed in sales. But I actually graduated from college with every intention of becoming a retail buyer. And I had this grandiose vision of going to Milan and picking out fabrics. And I was like, this is what my life's going to be like. I'm going to be a jet setter. And so I took a job with Neiman Marcus initially. And part of going into the buying program was you had to work in the store and do like associate sales for a period, I think, of 6 months, and in order to qualify. And so I was like, whatever, I'll just get through this. And my manager at the time, she sat me down, like when it came time to write my recommendation. And she was like, I'm happy to write this for you. We've never seen someone like do this type of sale. Like I was having like $20,000 like sales weeks. And they were like, we don't see this normally. We're in this like very small corner of Neiman Marcus. So she's like, I just think that you should know what buying's going to look like. And it doesn't look like the vision that you have portrayed in your mind, but she was like, I think there's something else here and I think you should explore it. And that's the sales side. And so that was really like the beginning point for me, because in my mind up to that point, sales was like used cars and like slimy and gross and all the, a lot of men. And I didn't feel like I had a place there. And so I ended up I think I went on Monster, which I don't even, I went on like Monster, submitted a resume, and I ended up getting into a full class of like 16 AEs. And it was basically like a sink or swim. They were like, we're assuming that like 95% of you are going to probably end up failing. And I got into this class at the last minute, and I ended up becoming the top rep within a year on that sales team. And I remember I scheduled a demo on my very first cold call, and I was like, it's a sign. Like I'm supposed to be here. I'm supposed to do this. And I don't know if it was a sign, but just stayed with it ever since and just became really passionate about it. So that's my weird
start. That's awesome. Ironically, my first sales job was selling advertising to car salesmen. I'm just
love it
here. So my first sales job was to the people that we define as the sellers that we're not keen on or whatever. But I love that everyone always draws that parallel because it rings very close to home for me. What about you, Ashley?
Yeah, I also fell into sales, but intentionally. And I have two sort of major career transitions. Some people know this about me, but I was once upon a time a professional dancer. And so having gone from the entertainment world and the dance world into the tech world was my first big transition. But like Carol, I transitioned into a marketing role because everyone around me was like, oh, you're a creative human, like you should be in marketing. And I was like, yeah, that tracks, like, let's do that. And then fast forward, I'm marketing. I started working for a company that was actually a community for sales professionals, and I was helping build that platform for 3 years. And so I was just day in and day out talking to salespeople, trying to, get people on this platform, whatever. And as time went on, I was like, this, similar to Maggie, I was like, this could be a fun challenge. Like, could I do something like this? And then also having the same preconceived notions of like, you have to be slimy or, whatever, loud, obnoxious, smooth talker, all that. But the more I got to know folks who are actually doing this job, I was like, oh, these are actually really amazing humans who do really cool things and are so smart and so capable, and you can literally do anything once you've got this sales background. So yeah, I took the leap. I decided to, give it a shot, and landed a SDR role at Chili Piper, and then have made my way up since. And very similar to Carol, I'm like, best decision I ever made. And I actually get to use a lot of my creative thinking and creative brain in this role. It feels like almost more so than when I was in a marketing role.
I love that. So the theme, none of us intended to be here, but here we are. No, I mean, I think that is a really great thing to think about, because the landscape is really changing. Like, sales is becoming something that people actually are like intending to move into. And what we're still seeing is it is still a heavily male dominated kind of field, right? But as the description of this webinar states, like, women rock at it. We're great at this. But it doesn't always come super naturally to someone at first, right? Somebody at first kind of has to find their footing, has to understand their path and overcome barriers. And so why don't we dive in a little bit on that? I'll just throw this question out there. I won't direct it at anyone specifically, because maybe some people might have to think about it a little bit more. I'll start with a brief story for myself. So the question is, what, if any, barriers have you encountered as you, started your profession in sales, and how did you overcome or learn from them and help like you moving forward? So one of my first, sales roles, it was definitely bro culture. Like, everyone went out all the time, and I had just got out of college. So I kind of was still in that like going out a lot sort of mindset. But as I kind of grew and changed, I realized like, hey, I wanted to be a little bit less like going out on a Tuesday, right? And so that was kind of hard to navigate, because I felt as though if I wasn't at every happy hour and I wasn't at every single like event, every single meeting, like, was I going to get like passed up for the person, male or female, right, who did go to all of those? But I think what helped me in overcoming that sort of like internal obstacle was making sure that I brought 110% every day when I was there, because results are results. You can't deny that. And so for me, I still kind of have that mindset, even though I am managing a team at this point, and just have the data to back it up, right? Go in prepared, and no one can argue that. So I'll throw this out to anyone else that, wants to take it. If any barriers you've encountered, how you've grown from them, how you've learned from them, applied them going forward to be even better.
I can jump in. I think, there's one side of this answer, which is very similar to you, where I felt this need to kind of melt into like what I saw around me, which for my first, several companies was all men. And I was like trying really hard to like find similarities. I hate golf. So I was like, yeah, and I was like trying to figure out like, how much of this can I fake my way through, essentially. And I just got to a point where I was like, it doesn't make sense. Like, it's not of interest. I don't have the same interests. I don't want to do the same things. I don't want to go to the golf events. I don't like it. That's just where I'm at. And so I think like really similar to you, kind of like stepping into myself and realizing like, here are the areas that I want to focus my time. Here's where I'm going to perform in my role, so that those didn't really become like blockers or barriers. But I think one of the other things, and this is a theme that comes up for a lot of folks who are kind of considering, and when I'm doing a lot of like early career mentorship as well, it's kind of like, what if I didn't come from this industry? I think that's always like a big concern. And I was coming out, I was literally the cashmere salesperson at Neiman Marcus. And so I'm like, you can't even begin to try to like connect the dots there. But what I realized was, and what I coach a lot of people, like as I'm talking to them on, is there are always things that you can take from your experiences in your life and apply them. And so I think about like, we used to have like contests, and like, if you sold X number of like cashmere sweaters, you get a free one. And I remember we did this contest, and it was like 2 weeks long. And I ended up with like 10 of these like $400, $500 cashmere sweaters, because I was just like blitzing through this contest, selling these things like crazy. And so I think about things like that. I'm like, that becomes a KPI. You can share that in an interview. And I also talk to like candidates where they're like a door. I remember, I'll never forget this candidate through rework. He's like, I work the door at a luxury high rise. And he's like, I have nothing to show for. I can't talk about that during an interview. And I was like, do you mean to tell me that you couldn't sit down in an interview and tell someone that you probably have the strongest set of customer service skills out of anyone on their team today by dealing with luxury residential clientele downtown Chicago? And so we like reworked that into a story that he could then take and like bring to his interview. So I think about things like that too. Just those are the barriers that some of those are kind of like we may have created for ourselves in our minds. Some of it's just like things that we've heard out there on the market. But a lot of it I've realized over the years is somewhat internalized. And as I've been able to break down some of those barriers, I'm trying to do the work to kind of pass those learnings backwards to the next folks that are kind of coming up through the sales ranks too.
I love that. That's awesome.
I'm going to jump in because I love that as well, Alexine, and I get the privilege of talking to a lot of folks who are trying to make this transition, because I'm very vocal about my own transition, and that comes up a lot. That's something that I did both times, was like create this narrative that becomes this relatable story, that like you take something that seemingly there are no ways to connect the dots, but you can do it. Like you do it, you create this narrative, and then it's almost like a PR pitch where like literally every conversation you have is that story, is that narrative, and then you're just making it stronger, building that. And it's a small world. People like start remembering who you are, where you're coming from, what you've done, what you've accomplished. Yeah, that's a super great way to kind of overcome some of the self-imposed barriers, if you will.
I feel like everything we're talking about is just like the theme of this, right? Like owning your own path, owning your own voice. And it makes me think about when I first started at Lead Feeder, and like, keep in mind, this is my first sales role, and the company's based out of Finland. So everyone's out in Europe. They fly me over. And before this, like I'm Googling like, okay, what's like the culture like? And traditionally, well, like the stereotypes that Finns are like very stoic, and they're like, hi, like don't hug me, and like don't chit, like no small talk. But I'm like very bubbly, and I'm like here, like, like I'm going, hi. But I decided to like own it. I didn't like change myself. They hired me for a reason. They flew me over there. You know what? I'm giving my hug. Nice to meet you in person. And like, I'm forcing it out, like conversations out of them. And at the end of the day, it turns out we're all the same. We all like to laugh and tell stories. And, it's just that sometimes it's easy to get in your own head and you feel like you have to mold yourself in this, but if you just own up to it and be confident in your own skills, like you said, just if you show up and show your performance, like everything else doesn't really matter. It's just you're getting in your own head. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of it comes from internal barriers, like those stories of, a big transition. Like Ashley and Alexine that you've talked with other people about, or you've gone through yourself. Like I used to get that question all the time when I interview, like, what kind of skills can you bring as an accountant to a sales role? And the first time, those came up, I was like, oh, great. Like I have no way of answering this question well, but in my time, like, I still had to manage clients. I still had to bring on new business with the accounting firm I was working with. And at night I was a server. So I was, selling restaurant menus and working in Chicago, selling different wines. So it was like, and I was doing both of those. Like I would work till 9 to 5, doing accounting. And then afterwards I would serve. So I was like, hey, I can hustle. And, I can also sell from this experience I've had at a restaurant, which, yeah, if you asked me when I was working there, I was like, these don't translate at all, but a lot of it can go back to it. And, just bringing yourself in the interview too.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. So let's shift gears a little bit. we talked a bit about barriers and kind of those obstacles and narratives that we have, in our head and how we've overcome them. And so and I think just with that, we started to kind of give advice, which was actually one of my questions I have printed out here. But maybe let's kind of dive deeper on that. Like, what additional advice you might have for a woman who is just starting out her career in sales. I think we've got kind of like own it, know who you are, stay true to yourself. But any nuggets of knowledge for somebody who maybe is thinking about making that shift or thinking about making that transition or even just getting started out?
I think I might take this from the more tactical side, because I feel like there are a lot of owning yourself, getting to know what your motivators are. I think on the tactical side, like getting involved, there's so many communities now, like sales communities, where you can get exposure to sales folks from all different organizations, learning from peers. That's something, I don't know that it existed when I first got into sales, but definitely not in the way that it exists today. And had it, that would have been the number one place that I would have started. So definitely like the community piece. You have a lot of like free learning resources that are out there. You have organizations that focused on like sales training, there are boot camps, like any of that. I think like really getting in there and absorbing some of that information. And then I always do, I do this today when I start a new role. I activate sponge mode, like just take it all in, like try to take in as much as you can. Don't assume you know things. Don't assume you know things about people either. Like there's just a lot of learning that happens when you're either like starting in sales altogether or starting a new role. So just like being in sponge mode, taking in, I always recommend just kind of like taking in and following everything for at least like a quarter. Like when you're starting something new, like just take the advice that's given to you. And then from there, you can always iterate, like change it up, try your own stuff, see what works for you. But especially if you're brand new to something, no point in recreating the wheel in like month one of that. So definitely a good time just to absorb the learnings around you and, hit the ground running.
Yeah. Sorry. No, you go for it, Carol.
Just quickly, I wanted to add, in addition to like all the communities out there, I used to reach out to people who went to my college, and you'd be surprised at how many working professionals will make the time to talk to you, especially if you say like, hey, trying to break into the career, can you give me the ins and outs, what I need to look out for? So yeah, you'd be surprised how many people will respond and be willing to talk to you.
Yeah. And that's a really good piece of advice too, that I definitely did not capitalize on when I first got into sales. But Carol, to your point earlier, and just giving women advice when they're first starting their career in sales is, there is that stereotype of like that we all talked about, the used car salesman, or sales is very male dominated, sales is for aggressive people, things like that. And I think like when you're surrounded, maybe, and I remember just kind of from my first sales job, I was surrounded by men selling, and their style was a bit more aggressive than I felt comfortable doing. And Alexine, to your point, of course, yeah, like figure out what works for the company, how they sell, things like that. But also, you need to create your own voice and your own style in it, similar to when you were flown over to Finland too, Carol. And I love that story. But yeah, you need to show that other part of it, because first, you're not going to feel comfortable just copying and pasting someone else's personality when you're trying to do sales. Of course, there's going to be playbooks that you need to follow. And you're not going to do well. It's not going to come off naturally for you. You're not going to enjoy it. And I wish that was advice that someone had given me when I first started in sales, because I wish I put more of my own voice into it. So I'd say, a lot of these companies can be male dominated. It doesn't mean that you need to have their exact personality when you're talking on the phones or in meetings and things like that.
Oh yeah, totally agree. I have a couple of other tactical things that I talk about with folks. If we back up, like before you're in that first role, before you get the job, when you're interviewing, I really encourage folks to sort of tier out the interviews, because Maggie, like you said, when you go into that interview and they start asking you questions, you're like, oh shit, I don't know how to answer that. Like, I've never interviewed for an account executive position. What the hell? I don't know. So if you've got like 5 companies that you are super stoked about, that you really want to go work there, don't apply blindly on the careers page. B, don't apply yet. Have like 5 or 10 or more other companies that you're like, maybe, like tier 2, tier 3, and apply there, get an interview, practice. Like, especially if this is your first sales role, you don't know what kinds of questions are going to come at you. And yes, you can get some information from people in the industry, people in communities. I highly, highly, highly recommend getting involved with the myriad of communities that are available to you all. But yeah, tier out the companies. That way, you get some interview practice in. That will help you narrow down and tighten up that narrative that you've been working on building. And then when you go into those top tier companies that you're really stoked about, you are going to be bulletproof. The other piece to that is get a referral in. You've joined these communities, you've connected with people on LinkedIn, you see people workplaces, get a referral in. That is the best way. Don't apply blindly on their careers page. And then to the point about like the sleazy salesperson, like we've all said it, that's where the perceptions were before we got in here. Look at all of us on this call. None of us are that. So I challenge your own points of view, challenge your own stereotypes, connect with people who are doing the job you want that maybe are more like you. Like, maybe there's people on LinkedIn that are talking about how their introvertedness helped them in their sales role. Connect with them, learn how. And then when you do land that job at one of those top 5 companies that you've prepared for and you're super stoked about, then you go in and it's 80-20. So no, you don't want to try to be a copycat of like this sales bro who is totally different than you. And we all know that there are things that work, right? Like if you've never done this before, you don't know what you're doing. So take what's been successful for other people and use it. Start there, 80-20. 80% of the time you're using that, 20% of it, you're tweaking it and you're figuring out, okay, well, here's how I work. Here's how I communicate. This is what I'm really good at. How can I fit this into this process that worked really well for these top salespeople at my organization, right? And then you start to find your own flow and voice and whatnot. So yeah, those are my 3 pieces of advice.
I love it. We are starting to get some questions from the audience, so I'll sprinkle some in here and there. Want to make sure we cover, a lot of the key pieces around like women in sales, career progression, making a transition. So if you are asking a question, please know that like we see them in here. We'll make sure to save some time to go through them all at the end as well. Just to preface, girls, you can start thinking about it. We've got some questions about like cold calling and prospecting and like getting your feet wet with stuff like that. So start to like get the wheels turning, because I'll throw that one over in just a bit. One question that I love, or one thing to think about, is women supporting women. And maybe this is a good one to tee up for you, Alexine, simply because of your group, Women in Sales, where you're the founder and the CEO. Because historically, we're not always the nicest to each other. What gives? I don't know, right? But I think that is changing a lot, and lifting up and empowering others in this field, in this profession. Not only does it feel good, but it makes a huge difference as we kind of break that glass ceiling and get more and more women in leadership roles and sales roles. It makes a huge impact for companies, as we know. So my question would be, how should women support other women in this field? What does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think in order to go forwards, kind of have to like go backwards. So I want to just preface, I don't necessarily, this is a tough topic, because I don't necessarily think like women automatically want to take each other down. I think that there's a lot of like historic stuff that's been ingrained into us over many, many years. I think about one of my early sales roles, and there was only me and one other woman on the team. And there were, I think at the time, 17 men on the team. And so it was very, very small ratio. And in every single one-on-one, my manager would ask me, don't you want to be the top girl on the team? Like, don't you want to be number one? And I was like, number one of what? Like, there's 17 other people ahead of us. Like, that's not good. Who cares if I be, And so it was just like, those are the things I think back to that people might not realize behind closed doors. For many years, like those were conversations that some of us had, or like coaching we were given, or so I think just, in thinking forwards, it's important to kind of like set the stage. I don't necessarily think it was just something like natural that came about. I think that's, you know, in certain instances, there's things like queen bee syndrome that people talk about a lot, where they can only be one. And there's just a lot to unpack there. It could be a webinar in and of itself. But as I think forward in terms of like, how do we support one another? I think of people like Lori Richardson, who, when I mentioned like I was going to be helping to launch a community, she was the very first person to raise her hand. This is someone with years of experience, a light years ahead of me, who has walked this road, who's been through this before, and selflessly, constantly texts me, gives me advice, jumps on calls. This is someone that doesn't have to do those things. But that was the first person that raised their hand and just like jumped in. And so I think that that's part of the work, is like, how do we support one another? How do we proactively kind of like try to seek to give back? Like, I'm constantly thinking about ideas for women in sales of like, what's some type of event that would be valuable to our members? What is a partner that actually has, like, I'm looking for partners right now that are like mental health focused, so I can provide like mental health resources back to the community. So I think that there's just like thinking proactively about ways that we can support one another and not making assumptions about one another either. I think Ashley kind of touched on this previously, but I think there's always this underlying assumption within ourselves sometimes too, that the other woman on the team is like out to get us. But I think you'll find, if you're able to kind of like take down some of those walls and tear down some of that residual stuff that's there, you'll realize like you probably have really similar stories, and that could be like a really good counterpart for you to have on your team, and someone that you may end up growing really close with, which is what's happened to me with a lot of women on my team over the years. So yeah, that was a lot of information, but just wanted to kind of go backwards to go forwards there.
Yeah. And it ties back into that narrative we tell ourselves, right? Like sometimes we are our own worst enemy. And I could definitely like see what you're saying there, Alexine. That's awesome. Anybody else have any ideas around women supporting women?
Yeah, that's one of my whys, like why I chose to go into sales. Like I said earlier, it was a challenge and seemed like something I could do and have be successful at. One of the other like really big reasons was because I didn't see a lot of myself in the profession, and myself meaning not just a woman, but a queer woman, a queer Latina woman. Like I wanted to be able to go and do this thing and be successful, and then, basically throw the rope back and be like, look, this is a viable option for you, and it's life-changing. It can be life-changing. I've shared this before, like I did not come from a lot of money. My mom cleaned houses and was a secretary. Like she didn't go to college. She raised single mom of 2 kids. Like to make the money that I'm making now was like unfathomable. This was never something that she could have even dreamed for me, and much less me for myself. So I wanted to be able to be the representation that I didn't see that for other folks. And so that's one of my whys, is to be in this position, to be able to be on this webinar today, to encourage other people who are in different, check different boxes, that this is a viable option for them for a career. And that's sort of what gets me fired up when I do have conversations with people who hit me up on LinkedIn and are like, I'm transitioning from being, a teacher, or from being a CS person, or from being a, server, whatever it is, to sales. And like, you did it. How did you do it? How, can you help me? And I think that's one way, is like we can just be this open book and this resource, because we're on this journey. And I remember Blake Hudson told me this, because I was telling him before I started at Chili Piper, I was like, I really want to be able to eventually help other people get into this role. And he was like, why eventually? You already have a day's more knowledge than the person behind you. Like, that's valuable. You already have value to add to people who are trying to follow you on this journey. And I was like, light bulb moment. Okay, cool. So yeah, I mean, that's why we're all here, right? Hopefully. Also, I highly recommend the book Text Me When You Get Home. Alexine, you mentioned the queen bee syndrome. It's basically just a collection of like this woman's own stories and path in navigating her relationships with women in her life. and it's just a very interesting read, and it was very eye-opening to me, to a lot of the like dynamics when it comes to women's relationship with women, both friendships and in work, etc.
I just, Ashley, I really can't believe that I've never thought about representation in terms of like being, I always thought like, okay, I'm a woman in sales, but like now I think about it, how many like Asian women are in sales? Like, can you like even, I can't even think of, I was like, wow, mind blowing. I'm like, I need to make that part of like my mission why too. And my niece the other day, I was visiting her in New York City, and she was like, Carol, so, what is it like in your career? You're in marketing, right? Like, I want to go into marketing. I was like, no, I haven't done that in like 10 years. I was like, I'm actually in sales. And she's like, oh, like I could tell, like she just dropped and like was like disinterested. And it just makes me think, and she's in high school right now. And so it's like, going back to what Alexi said, it's like we have to be proactive, right? And it's not about just saying like, okay, my doors are open, come to me when you need help. I think we need to like actively reach out, and I regularly do like volunteer and try to mentor high school students. I think like it's an important, like critical time in life where they're trying to like figure what's the next steps and what they're gonna major in college. But even like internally, like at Lead Feeder, it's not enough for me to just say, okay, like reach out to me anytime you want advice. Like, but like I like have like monthly meetings with like other women. I'm like, let's do this. Let's talk about how we navigate. Like,
yeah,
the company. How can we get you up there? No. So yeah, I think being proactive is the key in helping others.
I love that.
Yeah, I'd say the same. From what everyone said too, it's like I think all of us on this call are, not starting out in sales, obviously. That's why we're talking about all of this today. But yeah, being proactive about it. And I think just like advice for your own internal team, if you're a woman out there listening to this who's been in sales for, longer than, let's say, a year, or you're like in a year into it, and you notice, other women who are starting out as SDRs or BDRs, it could be kind of intimidating. And of course, they're telling stories in their heads of, I shouldn't speak up on this meeting because, everyone else has great ideas, or there's more men on this meeting, so I'm a little afraid to speak up. And I definitely have felt that before. So I think as, the woman at your company, and you've been in that role a little bit longer, reach out to that woman, Slack her and say, hey, like, is there anything I can do to support you? Do you want to meet and talk about like my experience here, anything like that? And I think it really is about being proactive to change that narrative that, the queen bee syndrome or competition against each other, because I think, yeah, can sometimes be ingrained on teams, but, us as more seasoned women in sales, we can, change that for sure.
I love that. Being proactive. That's a great theme to think about. Like, it's not just always going to be an opportunity presenting it to us. We're creating that opportunity. All right. Awesome. I love it. Why do you guys think that companies will benefit from hiring more women to their sales team? What do you think the impact is? I mean, obviously we can look at the stats and all that, but like, data driven or just a little bit more qualitative pieces, like what do you think some key topics around that are?
Ooh, can I start?
Get it, girl.
So yeah, the stats are there, right? Like women-led teams have higher quota attainment. I think it's like 94% compared to mostly like teams that are primarily men. But outside of that, I think it was Jen Spencer who said this to me on a podcast interview like a long time ago, before I even got into sales. She mentioned like your buyer pool is diverse, right? You are selling to men, you are selling to women, you are selling to people all over the country, maybe all over the world. Your buyer pool is diverse. So why would your sales team not be diverse? Or like, why would you think that having a diverse sales team would be a bad business move, right? Like, not that you have to pair up like Asian woman with Asian woman, because that's silly, but like, just if we think about it realistically, we need our sales team to somewhat like look like our buyer pool, which in today's world is, you know, depending on the type of company you work for, like, is wildly diverse. And yes, there's a million other statistics that we could all rattle off that talk about how women are better listeners. I think Gong put that out because they actually have the data that shows that women aren't interrupting as much, they're listening more. That the introvertedness is actually you know, key quality to help in a sales role, or can be. Yeah, there's tons of reasons why, but I think the big one that, like I said, I heard even before I got into sales was that your buyer pool is so diverse. So like, why wouldn't you have a diverse sales team? Like, it just makes sense.
Like Ashley answered. Yeah, it's like, yeah, you're absolutely correct. Like the immediate response whenever people kind of ask that question is like, why wouldn't your company benefit? Like, it just feels very obvious to like ask that same question right back. But I think that, yes, we know that the data supports this. Gong, all these other, you know, they put the data out. It's, you know, you can look through hosts of information that are telling you like, whether it's individual contributors, leaders, and I agree, like our buyers are going to be diverse, therefore our team should match that. But I think like, I don't know, just my honest answer is like, it makes perfect sense. And I think like the reality is like, you need that difference in perspective to approach problems and solve them differently. Like if we have the exact same people on every single team, we'll just keep repeating the same thought process and the same mannerisms and everything until you have a diverse workforce, not just seen in the sense of women, just full diversity. Then you start to get to see how other people think. You get to see how other people approach problems. It can open up vast worlds within your business. Like what if you know, you have people who are going to think of a new product, like something that you haven't even explored yet. And I think that for me, it's a business opportunity. So that's why that question is so obvious to me, is like, what are you missing out on by not having a diverse workforce? And so, no, I think everything Ashley shared was great, but just wanted to tack that on the end.
Okay, wonderful. Any other thoughts on that, or shall we continue? I think that was a great segue into the question about advice for companies to attract and retain women. And historically, it's just been maternity leave, which that's a topic in its own. I have a young son and Carol has 2 young boys as well. But what other things can we do here? Like, how can companies attract, retain women to their teams? What do you guys think?
This is kind of just, this is more from like when you're interviewing places, and I mean, it's really starting, like, it's not always an easy answer of, you know, what's going to attract and retain women. But I mean, this is just something that I do if I'm looking at jobs. Like when I was last looking at jobs, is I looked at the leadership. If the leadership has no women in it, or all of the same types of people, and there's really no diversity, I'm most likely skipping out on working on that company right away. And that's like it's like an easy thing for me to do. And it's something, you know, I do automatically. So I mean, that's a hard thing to solve for. That comes down to, you know, having a diverse culture, like putting time and effort into doing that and looking at the recruiting sense of things. And I know it's not exactly like a, you know, perk of working somewhere, but that is really important. And it's definitely something that I look at, and I've talked with other people that they look at too, because a lot of what's going to trickle on down to the rest of the company comes from leadership too, and that community with leadership. So it's an easy way to roll people out. So I'd say, you know, there's something to look at.
Yeah. I'll jump in here because I added this question to our list. I have a lot of thoughts. I went to a Lesbians Who Tech Summit many years ago, and one of the talks I went to was about accessibility, and they were talking about accessibility in tech, and it got a lot like in the weeds, but they told a story in the beginning, and they were like, okay, way back when like you have sidewalks and curbs, and somebody at some point decided like we need to add these ramps at the crosswalks of all like the sidewalks, right? And that probably came about because of folks in wheelchairs who needed to be able to get up on, be able to cross the street and not have to like fall off of a curb and then, whatever. And it was a problem that needed to be solved. In solving that problem, who else did it help?
Strollers. Women with strollers.
It helped parents with strollers. It helped people who were on those little wheelie crutch thing, when you like hurt your ankle and you're like wheeling yourself around, right? Like it helped I lived in New York for most of my life. It helped the people pull in their like rolly thing with the groceries in it. You know what I mean? Like it helped so many people outside of just what the focus was, right? So if we go back to this question of like attracting and retaining women other than just maternity leave, which should be table stakes, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that that's not important. That is just duh, like do it. Also, can we call it parental leave?
Parental leave, 100%.
100%. I'm not having children, but like, whatever. Anyway, I can go down a whole other rabbit hole. But so that's table stakes, but let's think about other things that are going to benefit like humans on your team that might be attractive to women who aren't going to birth children. So things like financial education and resources, things like bereavement leave, things like mental health and wellness. Somebody put ClassPass in chat. I love it. Like offer wellness perks, right? Like things that are going to benefit, like these are attractive to women, but they're attractive to everyone and they're helpful to everyone. So if we can start thinking bigger picture of like outside of just, the table stakes offerings that should be there anyway, then we can attract and retain not only women, but just more talent in general.
Absolutely.
Ashley.
Adding to that. Yeah, she did. I wanted to bring it back to the point where, wait, Maggie, did you say that if you looked at a company and all the leadership were men, like you probably just disregard them, right? Did you say that? Oh, who said that?
Yeah.
Maggie?
Yep.
Yeah. So I was thinking about that. It's like the classic chicken and the egg problem, right? Because like, what if there are some companies who genuinely want to start diversity, but like they just happen to have all the like leadership men? Like, what do they do, right? Like, are they like screwed at that point? I think it comes down to just owning up to it. Maybe in the interviews when you're recruited, to say like, hey, like address it. We know we don't have the diversity of here, but we want to change that. And this is why we're reaching out to you. And then after that, everything will fall into place. Like I think about how I was definitely the first full-time woman at my like lead feeder. There was 15 men who looked tall, handsome in Finland. And here I am coming in. And Alicia was my next hire in the US. Now, I didn't go looking for a woman. I looked for the most qualified person, right? But Alicia happened to be it. And after that, it just trickled down. And in the US, we have more women than men. And it's not because we're favoring women. It's just because we have more women representation. Now the most talented women are coming to us and we have a bigger pool. And like, that's like the key, and I don't want to think like, oh, we're being biased and we're choosing one over them because of like gender, race, or whatever like that is. But yes. Oh, someone saw my, I'm sorry, I just got sidetracked on a chat. Someone said at me. But yeah, that's what I want to say on that. Thank you.
Love it.
I think one piece too, that just like a really quick thing too, especially if you're a sales leader and you are a man, I think one of the biggest pieces of advice would be like, don't try to hire in your image. Like, I think it's really easy. And this happens to all of us. There are always biases that are kind of like running. There's an undertow. We all like to say like, we don't have them, but you can do any of these anonymous like bias surveys. And most of us will find that we do have some, some things there. And so I do think it's really important, especially if you're a leader, to not necessarily look for the person that is you. Like that for a long time was the thing that everybody would say in interviews. They're like, I'm just trying to find a younger me, and then I'm going to put them on the sales team. And then you look around, and the sales team looks like a lot of the same. And so it's like, wow, it looks like you really did do that. But that creates obviously kind of a line in where, candidates that are different, that don't match, who that person is, what they look like, their skin color, like all of these things, that's going to then create a barrier for those candidates to have access to teams. So I think like trying to get away from trying to hire in your own image, try to look for people that complement the areas that you're not good at. Like if you're a sales leader and you have, like some area of development that you need to work through, that could be like a really cool candidate for you to add to your team, like a skill set that you're not aware of or still trying to work on. So I think just that whole notion and idea of like hiring the young version of you creates a lot of the same within our sales team. So I'd love to see some of that continue to get broken down.
Yeah, diversity of thought, I think, is such a big thing that, like, companies, if you the mindset of like, this is how we've always done it, so let's keep doing it this way. But if companies want to scale, they want to change, they want to get bigger or offer new products, like, we should be hiring people totally different from us, people that think differently, have different backgrounds. There was actually a question in the chat that we can kind of like segue. I know we've got about 5 minutes left, so let's see if we can kind of power through these, and I'll just pose them, and then whoever wants to go grab it. So there was a question here about career gaps, and what do you guys think about, what do we think about career gaps? I had a career gap, 4 or 5 months, and then a job that I took that isn't on my resume because it's not relevant. It was, a learning experience. So according to my resume, I have like a 9-month gap, and the way you speak to it, I think, is really important. Be intentional about it. I was waiting for the right fit. I was interviewing everywhere. I was heads down, finding what was a great next thing for me. And I found that, right? And I've now been where I'm at for 5 years, but I wasn't willing to, I think, not lower my standards. Maybe that's the worst way to say it, but like, I wasn't willing to compromise on what my must-haves were. Like, this is what I need, and I knew that I would find it. So for me, I interview people all the time. If I see a career gap, I do not care. Just find a way to speak to it and be intentional about it and own why it's there. And we move on. Great, cool,
Yeah, I actually have it's a little ways back in the resume now, but I have like a 6-monther, and it's so funny because like that, not anymore, but like years ago that would come up in an interview, and I was like, I was number 1 on the sales team. I resigned. I wasn't happy. And then I took 6 months and traveled, and now I'm interviewing. And I swear I would never get like questions, but like I had like a very succinct response. And I was like, boom, this is it. And then I would just like, I would not break eye contact, and people would just be like, all right, so what kind of performance metrics can you share? And we would just like blaze right past it. So I think, to your point, like if you can kind of craft like a very succinct response or reasoning, and that could be anything, by the way, that could be like, hey, I was taking parental leave, and it was really important for me to spend time with my family for that first 6 to 9 months. And like, if someone, like, what is someone going to say with that answer? Like, what are they going to be like? Oh, that was a really poor decision. Like, no one's going to say that in an interview. So I think if you can have that level of confidence and speak to the experience, and whatever that experience was. I had a friend who had a family member who was end of life. And so they wanted to take time off to spend time with that family member. Like, what interviewer in their right mind is going to like pick into that answer and be like, oh, well, poor career choice. Like, I think they're just these decisions we make. We do what's best for us, and we have to feel really self-assured that that was the right decision at the right time.
I love it. That's great. Let's do another one.
Wait, could I add to that just really quickly? Because I actually want to ask the group, but what if like you have a gap because you just couldn't find a job? You interviewed like 100 times, and you just, that, I think that's the harder question to answer, right? If you weren't intentional about that, you traveled the world, or you're caring for someone, like, how would you navigate that?
That's a good one, Carol. I think very similar to what Alicia said. Like, if you're interviewing and you're just not finding the right fit, then that's okay. Like, I think the way you said it, Alicia, was just fine. You don't want to lower your standards. You have must-haves, and if places aren't meeting them, like I tell people all the time, you're interviewing them just as much as they're interviewing you. And if you've got your must-haves and they don't check those boxes, bye. And that's okay.
Well, I mean, if you don't get the job, there's a reason. It wasn't a good fit. Yeah.
And I do want to like asterisk that, like, I recognize that's a privileged place to be, in being able to say like, oh, you don't meet all my needs. No, thanks. I can continue interviewing for 3 to 6 months. That's coming from a huge place of privilege. So I just want to recognize that. And I think it's perfectly fine, Carol, to like, and anyone else who's concerned about that, because like Alexine said, you just look them in the eye and you are like, here's the deal. This is what happened. next question, please. It's irrelevant. Can we move on?
I love it.
And that resource that's in the chat, I don't know if anybody saw it, but Amy Volas has a scorecard that is awesome. Like, this has been my go-to for the last several years. Highly recommend checking out that scorecard. It will help you decipher like which companies are right for you, which opportunities make the most sense. So worth checking out. Just want to throw that out there.
Yep.
Awesome.
Totally.
All right, we've got just one more minute left, so I am going to pick and choose. There's a couple. How about this one? Do you all think Pavilion is worth the membership fee? So Pavilion Sales Resource, it's a membership group. I'm not in that, so I can't really speak to it. But if anyone has any context on joining any sort of paid programs for it,
I'm in Pavilion. And Chili Piper pays for it. So again, place of privilege. I have found a lot of support and success within my like local chapter. That's been super fun. And then also I signed up for a couple of courses, and within those courses you get put in a cohort. So another smaller group of people that then you're like more intimately connected with. And like now my sales school cohort from like months ago, we still have a channel that we all chat on and ask questions. I found the biggest benefit was that all of these people are coming from wildly different industries and selling to different types of personas than I am. And so again, diversity of thought. So when I'm trying to solve a problem and I'm in this echo chamber of people who sell to salespeople, I can maybe get an outside perspective of someone who sells to CIOs or someone who sells to like logistics folks, right? Like, and then something that they've got in their back pocket can help me and whatnot. So I would say, yes, it's worth it. And I say that from a place of like, I'm not paying for it. So take that with a grain of salt.
I'm in the
Alicia,
Ashley,
go ahead. Sorry.
Exact same boat, like running through my reimbursement program as well. So I also enjoy it. I think it's been a really good resource. I will add one other, probably like one of the most valuable events that I did last year that I paid out of pocket was Surf and Sales. So that's
100%.
surf.
I've been twice.
Yeah, I'm going on number 2 this year. We got to compare. I don't know which session you're in, so we'll talk. But yeah, like I think that's a really cool resource. I think the key theme is like anything where you get to be in more of an intimate setting and get to know people in like that kind of cohort group. I always find a lot of value from that too. So highly recommend checking out Surf and Sales as well as another investment if you have a very plush education reimbursement program at your company.
Alicia, could we take that last question from the LinkedIn Live? Because I think it's super important to address it.
It's
in the chat. It's in the chat.
In the chat. Got it. Okay. Yeah. All right.
Because
let's do it. And we'll close with this.
Sales is hard. Life is hard. So if you want to repeat that question.
Okay. Awesome. What if you lose all your motivation starting over and over, having no success? Losing appetite to even motivate yourself, let alone hold on to your essence and your real path. I can give a little nugget on this because I've been there. Just standing true for who you are and what you believe, I think, is really important. Having things that you're passionate about in your 5 to 9 outside of just work. I've been guilty of being that person who kind of like put so much identity and self-worth into like my job and my career and introducing myself as Alicia and I work at, and we're all much more than that. And when we're able to bring our true self and authentic self to work, you will see more success. It's just how it is. So I think knowing that like careers, amazing, being in sales, amazing, being a strong woman, amazing, but like using it to define you didn't work for me. So getting raw. But what do you guys think?
Yeah.
Quickly. Go.
Oh. No, go on. Sorry, Carol.
No. Just quickly, I think what everything Alicia said, 100%. And then secondly, I think just try to find the small wins. It's hard getting no's, getting hung up on like every day to day, but like focus on what you can work to improve on, like just the little wins. And I think that'll make your day a little brighter.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely agree with Carol, Alicia, what you said is finding, that self-worth outside of your career has helped me a lot. And I've definitely been guilty of making my career, making work, my whole identity at some points. And it doesn't play in my favor at all. And I think, yeah, having those small wins, and something I do personally is each week, because yeah, you're in sales, you could get a horrible month or 2 months of sales, but each week, just having a check-in with yourself of, hey, how am I feeling in this role? How am I feeling at this company? What was one piece of growth that I had this week? I think can just help you, encourage, just like you said, Carol, having those small nuggets that are completely outside of your numbers, because you definitely need to have that, and viewing your self-worth in and outside of work too.
Yeah, I would echo everything that was said. I think I had a really powerful conversation with my dad actually this week about kind of like, what is the definition of success? And I came from like a highly rigorous academic upbringing. My father like immigrated to the US. So we had like very high standard of like what you needed to learn and like achieve. And so we had a really interesting conversation about like, what is the definition of success? And it was so fascinating because, I think up to this point, I always thought it was like career, accolade, this, award, that. And he said something, he was like, I'm about to get married next month. So he was like, you and your fiance, like you traveled all year. You got to see all these new places I'll never get to visit. He's like, that's success. And so I think like changing what that definition is, and like, even for me now, like my definition of success is if I can drink like 3 glasses of water, like that would be a success. I forget to drink water. So it's just like the things that we think about, that we think like, I think sometimes we look at everyone's like page, 55, and we're like, I'm supposed to be doing that. When in reality, like just try to get to your own page 2, try to get to your own page 3. Like we're all on these different pathways, but I think like the work that a lot of us, myself included, are trying to do is reshape what success means, because it doesn't like, it's our entire identity, and work is one piece of that, career is one piece of that, but there's all these other aspects that are our identity. And so I think just, I'll be doing this work along with you, whoever asked this question, but just redefining what success means.
I'll jump in real quick with motivation is fleeting. Systems are what get you there. So if you haven't read Atomic Habits, highly recommend it. But yeah, motivation is hard to maintain. Like that's, there are days when you don't want to get up off the couch and go do your run that you're supposed to do because you're training for a marathon. But if you've got a system in place where every day at 5:30, your shoes are right by the door, you put them on, you go do your thing, like it, yeah. So it's hard, and we've all been there. We're all doing it. But showing up today and like asking the question and trying to get advice and, getting, a system in place, that's going to be a great page 1.
Yeah.
All right. We're 6 minutes over, but we still have people in the room. If there's any other last questions, you can always feel free to reach out, I think, to any of us, probably on LinkedIn too. And we thank everyone for joining us today. Recording will, I believe, be sent out to anyone who registered. Thanks to LinkedIn Live. Thanks to everyone who's here streaming through Zoom. And we hope that we shed some light on some things that you can take and run with, and have a great Thursday. Thanks for your time, panel.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye,
Bye.
guys.
Bye.